Chokwe Lumumba was born in 1948 in Detroit, Michigan. He grew up in a working class family. He was a second oldest child in that family. His mother, when he was a child, involved him in civil rights activity. Interestingly enough, they were raising money to go to Mississippi to support the movement of Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and other groups in Mississippi. He became a student athlete. Chokwe was a very gifted athlete, went to Kalamazoo College, and there he became a student activist also. He was attracted to the Black Power movement, particularly after the assassination of Martin Luther King. You know, like a tremendous event occurred after the assassination of King. Many young black people joined the Black Power movement, and Chokwe was attracted to a group in Detroit that was based in Detroit, the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa, that demanded 5 states in the South, but also talked about creating a new society for black people, a society where there would be diversity, a society that would have cooperative economic and socialistic principles. And those are things that Chokwe carried with him to his last days. He believed in black self-determination. He believed that black people should form, and black people and other folks, because Chokwe was definitely an internationalist also, believed that there should be a new economic system that was more humanistic than the system we live in today. 1984, Chokwe helped found the New African People's Organization, which would be more activist than the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa, and then a companion with that in 1990 formed the Malcolm X grassroots movement. Chokwe was actually drafted to run for mayor of Jackson, Mississippi. Many people he'd been there, moved to Jackson in late 80s, and he had been engaged in as an attorney, being an advocate for people, for workers' rights, being an advocate for victims of police brutality. He had challenged activity of the Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist organizations in Mississippi. And because of his consistency of work in the state, many people said he should run for mayor. And the Malcolm X grassroots movement agreed with that, encouraged Chokwe to run, but decided to organize a different type of black politics there. We felt the traditional black politics weren't really working for us at this time. So in Chokwe's ward, first before he ran for mayor, in his ward when he ran for city councilman in 2009, a People's Assembly was organized. And so when you heard the clip, him saying the people will decide, that slogan was put into practice by organizing an assembly that would develop his platform. So his platform actually came from the community and not out of his head or not out of our organization. Chokwe, they formed this People's Assembly that helped him get elected, formed his platform, but also stayed organized while he was serving in the city council to provide him with direction on how he should proceed on policy. So it was a different form of politics that was being pursued, as you mentioned earlier, encouraging participatory democracy, encouraging people to get active and also to become politically educated. The hope was, and the hope is still, after his election for mayor, that we would organize a People's Assembly. In fact, this May 2nd through 4th in Jackson, Mississippi. There will also be the new Economies Conference, Jackson Rising Conference, that will look at new economies, cooperative economic development, things of that nature. In the legacy of Chokwe Lumumba, we have to continue these initiatives, even though his untimely death. He died of a sudden heart attack, and our prayers go out to his family. He, as you mentioned, was a black nationalist. He was inspired by Malcolm X, and Malcolm X talked to us about the legacy of the names that we were born with in this country, of having a legacy that was connected to slavery. And so Chokwe very much embraced the necessity of black people having a culture that was liberating And in that context, and many people who were part of the New African movement with Chokwe began to change their, like myself, to change their names to African names to try to embrace that heritage. But not only looking back, but also looking forward to try to develop new societies and new communities, and to be able to give our children a legacy that's connected to a liberation movement as opposed to a legacy that was connected to slavery. And so he very much believed that, for instance, one of the major issues, as we talked about Jackson, he felt that the curriculum needed to be changed in the schools to be able to give our children more knowledge of their history and heritage. He felt that was connected to low academic achievement in Mississippi, which you know generally rates in one of the lowest achieving school systems in the country. And so he believed in that. I also want to point out that Chokwe was an internationalist. One of the last times we spent an extensive time together, we were in Haiti. I know, Amy, you've covered the fight for democracy in Haiti.
Right.
And we went there in 2010 to examine what was going on after the earthquake. And we found at that time, and Chokwe and I both held a press conference in Port-au-Prince looking at that many of the funds that had been collected for people who were abused and who were victims of the earthquake hadn't been distributed to them. We also called for the return of President Aristide. So Chokwe, and this is just one example of the campaigns around the world or issues around the world that Chokwe began to speak about and speak on, as well as his support for human rights for people who had immigrated to Jackson and other parts of the United States from other countries and the rights that they had. He was very much opposed to the legislation that was occurring in Arizona and in the state I live in Georgia, that racially profile immigrants. So he was a champion. I mentioned he was a black nationalist. He's also an internationalist who campaigned for the human rights for all people.
I think both of us came to Jackson, Mississippi with the same goal in mind, and that is the realization that in the South, this is where change is going to occur that's going to affect our country and move it in a more progressive direction. I started with organizing public workers. Chokwe was involved in supporting that effort in Mississippi. There is now a state employees union, and also workers for the city of Jackson have organized and are in the process of renegotiating a new contract with the city of Jackson. Further, we recognize that with the in-migration of immigrants from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America and Mexico into Mississippi, that it would create a possibility of significant political change here. And many of the things that Chokwe was fighting for were the same things that we were fighting for. So 13 years ago, when we formed the Mississippi Immigrant Rights Alliance, we did it with unions and churches and civil rights organizations coming together, and Chokwe became our counsel. We worked together on many issues related to the human rights struggle. You know, for example, the effort to free the Scott sisters, two young women that were arrested and sent up with life sentences for allegedly stealing $11. We worked together on other issues as well. When he was attacked by a white supremacist judge in Durant, Mississippi, we joined in the effort to prevent him from being disbarred. We spent time on the picket lines in front of the Bar Association, among other things. But he was a strong supporter of immigrant rights, and I think almost every in fact, every conference that we had in terms of unity, trying to build unity between immigrants, brown folks, and African Americans, he was part of the efforts to demonstrate the need for unity. And so it was a natural thing when he announced that he was running for city council that we would join with him in that effort that was very successful. And it was very much a grassroots movement here in Jackson. We spent a lot of time going door to door. We had house meetings in communities, and it was a very successful campaign. And one of the first things, basically following the example of the city of Detroit, where Councilman Kenneth Cockrell Jr. had initiated an ordinance to prevent racial profiling by public officials, we adopted that idea in Jackson, and together with the legal project director, Patricia Ice, who is of Mira, who is also a native of Detroit, we crafted an ordinance that prohibited any public official in the city of Jackson from profiling racially or people that were immigrants in the city. And that really has created a foundation for an effort to make the city of Jackson a more welcoming community for immigrants as they come into Mississippi seeking refuge and seeking work here. And so we have worked together many times in really a constant relationship. And when the community basically encouraged him to run for mayor and in effect drafted for mayor, we joined his campaign with enthusiasm from the very beginning. And again, it was a people's campaign. We had the People's Assembly that developed in Ward 2, which he represented at the City Council, began spreading throughout the city. And as a matter of fact, this Saturday we have planned to have a People's Assembly for the whole city to talk about the issues that people face here. So the loss of Chokwe Lumumba was very shocking to us here. I heard about it shortly after he had passed yesterday afternoon, and you know, it's something that is very hard to take. And we extend our thoughts and our prayers to his family, who is very close in the community here. And we look forward to continuing his vision for the city of Jackson.
Last night, I didn't sleep at all last night. I seen pictures of stuff in magazines, different things as the world's changing and everything. Cell phones, up-to-date cell phones, and all these things. And today I done used mostly everybody's cell phone that's with me. I just wanted to touch them, and I've been playing with them and everything. And it's so amazing, you know, how the world has changed since 1994 and up to today. It is so amazing, and I'm still trying to soak it all in.
That was Jamie Scott, and before that, Gladys Scott, released from jail after 16 years in prison for an $11 robbery. Standing next to them was Chokwe Lumumba, their attorney at the time, now mayor, well, until yesterday. His sudden death is why we're talking about him today, though we interviewed him the day after he was elected. Also standing there was Ben Jealous, former president and CEO of the NAACP, who recently wrote a piece for the Huffington Post called Remembering Chokwe Lumumba. Remember him for us, Ben.
Sure. Well, you know, that was the fourth or fifth time we had stood next to people that we had worked together to free from prison over the last 20 years. And that was what was so remarkable about Chokwe. I mean, you know, he was a man who was, you know, a true man, if you will. He was active in his church. He had a great marriage to his wife. He had two wonderful kids that he poured all of his love into. He was a well-respected coach. He was an incredible lawyer, and he chose and he also was somebody with very strong ideals. And he chose to live and practice those ideals on the ground in one of the poorest places in our country. And he brought all of those things with him into the courtroom, all the compassion, all the insight, all his skill as a lawyer on behalf of the poorest people in the state. And that's ultimately why Bill and Derek Johnson, the president of the NAACP in Mississippi, and so many others, can say he was drafted to run for mayor, because everybody had basically fallen over, put it this way, an overwhelming majority of Jackson, I won't say everybody, but because there are definitely some people who were on the other side, but an overwhelming majority of Jackson, black and white, had fallen in love with Chokwe over the years that he had lived in town because he was just such a good person. And you knew in your heart when you lived in Jackson that the toughest thing in Mississippi to be is to be poor and black and in court without good counsel. And he would, and oftentimes, risk to his own financial stability, defend anyone who he thought he could help, who he thought needed help, and most importantly, who he was convinced that nobody else would help.
I want to go back to our interview with Chokwe Lumumba on Democracy Now! The day after he was elected. We talked to him June 6th. I asked him about the FBI's decision last year to place his former client, Assata Shakur, on the most wanted terrorist list. But before we play that clip, I wanted to ask you, Ben, about the media coverage, both of Chokwe Lumumba, his election, and the significance of the man who some call the most revolutionary mayor in America, the lack of the coverage. Last night, I was watching the networks, and I opened the New York Times today, the actual paper edition, and I didn't see a reference. Last night, watching MSNBC for hours. Now, I didn't watch every single second, so I might have missed something. But I did not see a reference. As Bill Chandler said, he died late yesterday afternoon.
Yeah. So, you know, I know that I saw something in the Times this morning online.
Online, yes.
Yeah, I mean, Chokwe. I mean, look, Chokwe is somebody who you have to give this much time to really talk about. This is a man who lived, if you will, sort of multiple journeys in his life, and who was quixotic to people because, on the one hand, you could easily stereotype him as being some sort of radical. He would say he was a radical because he didn't see that as being a bad thing. You know, he was somebody who thought that frankly, having ideals and practicing them in this country full of so much hypocrisy was a radical thing. But he was also somebody who was extremely committed mayor, very good at working across the aisle, even in his short tenure, with people in the business community, in the most conservative corners of the city, if you will. And he was somebody who, at the end of the day, yes, stood up for black people, but was ultimately committed to fairness for everyone in our country. And so, you know, for I think many in the media who sort of deal in sound bites, there's just too much there to quickly understand in 30 seconds, and so they move on. But he's ultimately the type of person that we need to understand better in our country, because our country ultimately is greatest, if you will, because of the contributions of idealists over the years who, yes, may have staked a far-out position at times in their lives, but ultimately served to pull our country closer to its own closely held ideals of fairness and equality and justice and the universal dignity of all humanity.
So let's go to that clip right now. When Chokwe Lumumba came on Democracy Now!, Juan Gonzalez and I interviewed him, and I asked Mayor Lumumba, well, he was mayor-elect at the time, about the FBI's decision to place his former client, Assata Shakur, who's in Cuba, on the most wanted terrorist list.
Well, I've always felt that Assata Shakur was wrongfully convicted, so she shouldn't be on a wanted list at all. She should have been in prison. She was actually shot herself and wounded and paralyzed at the time that the person who she was convicted of killing was shot. So she obviously couldn't have shot him. And she also was arrested, which caused the incident, for about 8 different charges, which she later was found not guilty of or were dismissed. So I think it's unfortunate. Assata Shakur, I believe, will historically be proven to be a hero of our times.
It is a tremendous loss for the city of Jackson, the state of Mississippi, indeed the country and the world. As you know, Brother Chokwe was a human rights activist, attorney, who fought for the liberation of all people, but definitely fought for the liberation of people of African descent here and around the world. He had developed a strategy to bring this city back, and as he said, not just Jackson, but Mississippi as a whole, who has a history that's not a very good history of treating people in the right manner. So we had just won a 1% sales tax that would build up our infrastructure. The president is talking about building infrastructure. Brother Chokwe had moved to do just that. That sales tax go into effect this Saturday. With that, he intended to build new homes, new businesses, new institutions that would help the people. We live in a state that has the
I mean, that's amazing, actually. He increased the taxes and had the support of the city to do that. It is a lesson to people all over the country about what is possible if that money is going back into shoring up the city.
Raised the water rates and as well as the taxes, and people understood that it was necessary in order that, but that was because they had faith in his vision. They had faith in what he stood for all of his life and what he stands for now. And so with that, they were willing to bite the bullet to make this place a better place to live.
You said, Kwame Kenyatta, you were just about to say this is a city with the highest, and I cut you off.
Well, we have a state that is the highest, the poorest state in the country. It is the most obese state in the country, and just recently found to be on the bottom when it comes to education. All of these things was in the mind of Brother Chokwe Lumumba as to how we can improve the quality of life here in Jackson. He could have lived anywhere, but he believed in the vision that the movement put forth years ago, the Malcolm X doctrine, that we must organize upon the land and organize the people upon that land, and he did just that. He gave up his home in Detroit to come here to one of the 5 states to begin to organize. He never wavered on that. He never faltered on that. He was committed to that to the end. His last call was a call about a meeting that I was in, and he wanted to know what the outcome of that meeting was. And so even in his hospital room, minutes before he died, he was working and doing the work of the people.